I think we're going to go ahead and start. My name is Julie Nowinski. I'm head of Adult Services here at Tech Memorial Library, and we'd like to welcome you all on behalf of the North Carolina Room staff and the Friends of the North Carolina Room to our program this evening, The Missing Years of Family Store. The event is sponsored by our Friends of the North Carolina Room, and we just want to say that their inspiration and support has been critical this year to the expanded programming we've been able to do. And I would like to mention a couple of the other programs that we're going to be having this year quickly. We have our last brown bag lunch, which is September 30th. At noon, and that'll be Kevin Frazier, and he's a local history author who will be talking about Asheville in the 1920s. And then also on October 28th at 6 p.m., our local history evenings will be Mark Essick, who's the author of the Great Appalachian Pig Drives, History of the Drovers Trails. And great program. So we would love for you all to come to those programs, and we'd also love to encourage you to become a friend of the North Carolina Room. It's a group of about 100 people who support local history and support the North Carolina Room, and all the money goes directly to staff projects and programming that the North Carolina Room does. So we would encourage you to do that. Also, I want to mention there are 4 exhibits on Asheville tourism that the North Carolina Room has put together throughout the library. There's one upstairs just inside the entrance to the library, and then also down the hallway here and by the entrance of the North Carolina Room. They're really fun and interesting, and if you ever took a vacation in Western North Carolina, you will recognize many of the things, especially some of us who did that many years ago. So I'd like to get to the business of the evening. We'd like to welcome Jan Shockett, a lifetime resident of Asheville. Her family has lived and owned businesses in downtown Asheville since the 1880s. She has an MS in folklore and is co-authored along with Sharon Farr the books The Family Store, A History of Jewish Businesses in Downtown Asheville, and also The Man Who Lived on Main Street, Stories About Saul Schulman. We'd like to welcome her and the distinguished panel of guests who are contributing their time and expertise this evening, and just thank Jan for being a great supporter and patron of the North Carolina Room, and we're grateful for all of her work, her important work and research in Asheville. And then also we would like to say it would be great if all the cell phones go off. So Jan, I'll turn it over to you.
Everybody, first of all, thank you for being here. And if it looked like we kind of were having a family reunion up here, that's actually because we are having a family reunion tomorrow through Sunday, and some of my family is here tonight, sitting on the first and second row, and our families are sitting on the first row. So this is the Bloomberg family, B-O-O-M-B-E-R-G, pronounced Bloomberg, and that is what's going on with that. I really want to thank the library for doing this, because they're so great, and the North Carolina Room is pretty amazing. If it weren't for the North Carolina Room, Sharon and I really could not have done most of what we came up with. They've been incredibly, incredibly supportive. So I do agree with Julie. Thank you so much, and you all. I want to thank Sharon Farr, who's here, who together we did this exhibit that took about 4 years worth of research and culminated in an exhibit that's up all over downtown right now. And I will tell you later at the end of this program how to find out where the locations are. But this was my year to put all the panels up, because Sharon had done it in the past, we had done it together in the past, hadn't been up in 9 years all over downtown. But Sharon begged off this year because she's actually writing a book about the history of all the Jews in Asheville, the Jewish history, Asheville's Jewish history. And she will have a sign-up sheet at the end of this program. You can go to her table at the back of the room, sign up to find out more about that book. Let's see, I want to thank our the people who are actually going to be in our panel, who I'll introduce later. Thank you so much for giving your time. And our original supporters who are mentioned in our book of the panels, which you can today buy at the back of the room. But our original supporters who helped us do this whole exhibit are listed in there. Let's see. Oh, yes. I want to thank my cat, Gemma, who loaned me her mousy laser toy so I can have a laser pointer for you all tonight. So thank you, Gemma. Now, you all know a little bit about me because Julie introduced me, but I'd like to learn a little bit about you all. And I'm not standing up because honestly, having done the reunion, planned the reunion and a lot of other things in the last 2 weeks, I have to stay close to my notes and I can't really do that too well if I'm standing up and I have to move the pictures forward. So I'm just going to be here and I will talk as loud as you need me to. So I want to learn about you. Can everybody who is an Asheville native, who was born here and raised here, raise their hand? All right, you guys, hooray, hooray, hooray. Keep the hands up, everybody, so everybody can see. I'm constantly being told, oh, but there aren't any Asheville natives. Who's an Asheville native? We all know each other. There are Asheville natives. Yes, we're proud. And you all can come up and correct me later, because I'm sure that you can at the end of the show. Just there's not time to do it in the middle of the show. Now, this is more common. Who has moved here within the last 5 years? Look around, everybody. You don't think people are moving to Asheville? People are moving to Asheville. I want to welcome you. I'm glad you're here. You can learn a bit about the history of your new city here. And everybody in between natives and 5 years. I know there's a lot of you out there who are some of my friends. Welcome, and this exhibit is for you to take and learn and ask me now or at the end and any other time more questions. But as you can see, the forgotten history, I call this the forgotten history, because it really is a forgotten history that there were more than 454 different Jewish businesses between 1880 and 1990 in the core of downtown. Now, what's the core of downtown? Patton, Biltmore, Broadway, and Haywood Street. That's what we're sort of really considering the core of downtown. What you will learn tonight, let's see. You are going to learn that this is a phenomenon. You're going to get a very quick overview of Asheville across the years, and we're going to have a panel, and I'm going to step it up. So, Jewish store. What's a Jewish store? Is there a Catholic store? This is actually something that somebody said to me when I was taking a storytelling class in Chapel Hill at a continuing ed thing, and I was telling a story about working in a Jewish-owned store in Chapel Hill when I was in college. It was exactly like my parents' store, had the exact same things, and there was a whole punchline. And this person, we had introduced ourselves at the beginning, and I knew that this young man who said this was a senior, so he was about 22, and I thought, well, of course he's not going to know what a Jewish store is, because it really was a phenomenon that pretty much ended around the late 70s, the early 80s. And if you were born in 1975, you wouldn't have gone into any Jewish-owned stores. You would have gone to the mall, to a chain store. The buck stops nowhere, and that's just what happens. So, why was this phenomenon, which I contend and researched and believe occurred from around the early 1880s, were when the really mass immigrations from Eastern Europe started, to around, as I said, 1975, 1980. Well, let's just take a little look here. If I can get my brand new computer going. Here's the old country. These are some guys in the old country. Actually, these are relatives of the Rosens, I think, in maybe Russia, maybe Lithuania. And in the old country, Jewish people were very restricted as to what they could do for occupations. Jews were not allowed to own land. Hence, they could not be farmers. They were not allowed to be members of guilds, so they could not have a craft. They could not be coopers or bricklayers, or they couldn't do anything where you actually had to be a member of a craft. So there were very few opportunities for Jewish people to have as a livelihood. One of them was being a merchant. At the same time, as they thought about leaving, because the situation was starting to get really bad in the 1870s, 1880s, in whatever country they happened to be coming from, there was already sort of a network set up, particularly in the South, by a man who was from Lithuania, which is where our family came from. His name was Jacob Epstein, and he had this business called the Baltimore Bargain House. And what he did was he sold packs to traveling peddlers with packs on their backs. And he set them up. They would contact him. He would send them a pack. He had a whole map in his office, and he would assign a territory where there was not already a peddler. And people would go there and from bean peddlers sort of decide where they wanted to live, what would be a good place once they had enough money to have a store. And Jacob Epstein was smart because he realized that the peddlers were starting to settle down, and he eventually just became a distributor for store goods. So if you wanted to start a store like David Schulman's father Saul did, you would write to Baltimore Bargain House and give him send him $500, and he would send you a whole store's worth of stuff back in the 1930s. So this happened not just in Asheville, this happened all over the country. Well, I can't really speak to large cities, but it certainly happened in rural areas, in the prairie, in the South, out west, but it particularly happened a lot in the South, I think, because the South is a great place to live. But anyway, in Asheville, what this resulted in was, this is the first block on the east side of Biltmore Avenue, and this picture is from, I think, the 1920s probably, and every single store, like Gemma's pointer, okay. So from up here, where we know it as the Pack Theater, but it's actually going to be the Art Museum now, all the way down to almost where the parking building is, every single store in here was a Jewish-owned store. There's my grandfather's store, his jacket right there. I did not know him, he died when my dad was young. Here is a Michael Love store right here. And I know that my Uncle Jack Bloomberg had a shoe store in here that loved shoes. Anyway, so there's an entire street there. Most of the businesses in downtown Asheville started on Biltmore, which at that time was called South Main Street. Some were on North Main Street, which is Broadway. Those names changed from the Mains to Broadway and Biltmore Avenue in 1913. Here's a couple more for your viewing pleasure. This was my great-grandfather's store, also on Biltmore Avenue, the racket store. They did not sell rackets. I think there was a varsity men's store. They were menswear stores. I guess they wanted to give you the idea of active, stylish men. This was the first location of Finkelstein's pawn shop, and it was about where, it was in the middle of the first block of Biltmore on the west side. And this is where Crest is. This is the second location of Bon Marché, Solomon Lipinski's store. Now in our exhibit, you would be doing yourself a favor if you went all around and looked at all 13 exhibit panels. Again, I'll tell you how to do that at the end of this program. Or if you also bought, the book has all the information in that too. So let's get a little bit, back up just a little bit so you can go into the history of what Asheville was like. In 1890, this was what Asheville was like. Let's see, this is actually pretty much the first block of Biltmore, and that's about it. I think this courthouse is up here, and the courthouse is actually where Pack Square was, right, or is right now. So down here is basically the Aloft Hotel. It's a previous hotel. This is called the Swananoa Hotel, I think, or the Berkeley, Swananoa Berkeley. That's the first block. So as you can see, this is the Battery Park, the old original Battery Park Hill, shingle on the top of the Battery Park Hotel on the top of the hill. So it was not very sparsely populated as it is today. That was 1890. This is 1911, and none of these were Jewish-owned stores, but just to give you an idea of where this was, this right here is where Kosana on the square is, the restaurant. This is sort of the entry to back behind there. This is the entry to Rhubarb. And 1911. So I'm going to show you, these kids kind of could be in the Little Rascals, couldn't they? Does anybody, I think my relatives, at least one of them knows who these people are. These kids were, this picture was taken before 1905 because that's when Harry Bloomberg, who started Harry's on the Hill, Harry's Cadillac and Pontiac. These are his siblings, not all of his siblings, but some of his siblings. This is a neighbor. This is, these are his brothers, his one sister and another sister. Frida, Edna, Nat, and Sigmund. And Harry was more in it after this. Or maybe he was a baby and he just wasn't in the picture. But I'm going to just show you kind of where people lived at that point. Some of them lived in Montford, but a lot of them lived in the area that is actually, this is Market Street right here. The Asheville Biltmore Hotel is now called the Altamont Apartments. Right here is where the Sheridan Four Points is. You can see the First Baptist Church here. The Renaissance is up here, but right here, there's some very old houses that, this is in the 1920s or 1930s already, so these houses are a little decrepit. But those houses there are these kids' front yard. And that whole area was where people lived, where now there's the Renaissance and Executive Park Plaza and city office buildings, things like that. So that's in the 20s, again, a little bit more. This is 1925, looking from Vance Monument towards down Patton Avenue, towards Bon Marché. You can already see Bon Marché here, and the new Battery Park Hotel. The old one's been leveled, and they're starting to build. The Grove Arcade, which you can see right here. This is from the Battery Park Hotel, and this is where the Grove Arcade is being built. Here's the Jackson Building and Langren Hotel, which is now being turned into a Marriott Hotel after having been a parking building for a long time. This is in the 1930s, and I will say this is from the west, looking towards the east. Vance Monument would be up here. You can see Crest has been built. This is the block that's now the Wells Fargo Bank. This is Hayward Road right here. The S&W is right here, you can see. So that initial photo that was at the very beginning, I neglected to say, of the lady in front of her store called Dora's, that was my great aunt Dora Bloomberg Rapport. She had a hat shop. So that was there. Right here was a man named Roy Swartzberg, not a relative. He had Varsity Men's Shop. This was, I think, the bank right here. But on this corner right here was Fader's Corner, or Wilkins Corner, somebody's gonna have to correct me, which was a soda shop and gathering place, and that would be the corner of College Street and Haywood. Just a few more pictures of what went on back then. This is a fire in 1925, but the Emporium, the nicest department store in town at the time. Here's where the Pack Library, it was Pack Library when we were growing up. This is the art museum, and they're going to take over the space with Pack Place. But this was owned by my uncle, my great uncle Jack Bloomberg. It burned in 1925, and it sort of ruined his life and his family's life. But his granddaughter is here today for our family reunion. Tina, just wave your hand so people know you're here. Pollock's Shoe Store, 1951, Lou Pollock. Every Christmas would have a shoe giveaway that the nuns at St. Genevieve's, and that was a whole different story. Lou's kids, a lot of us went to St. Genevieve's. It was not the Catholic school, it was a private school for all girls and boys in the area. So he had a shoe giveaway every Christmas, and this is a picture of that. That is about where the lobster trap is right now. And Lou Pollock's granddaughter is my babyhood best friend. So she's come for our family reunion, and she's like family, and she drove here today from Cincinnati to be here. This is my parents' very first store called Bootery, and this was from 1944 when they opened it, because it was never quite that neat ever again. Where this is where the drive-through for the BB&T Bank building comes out on Pack Avenue. So they took that entire block to build the BB&T Bank building. And here's a picture of Harry Bloomberg. Famous Harry Bloomberg started his Motor Inn, which took care of cars and housed them for people who didn't want their cars out in the weather, whether they were residents or visitors. And this started on Market Street, which is now the visitor center for the Thomas Wolfe House. He moved over here, which is actually where we are sitting right now. This was torn down after they moved out to West Asheville, Harry's on the Hill. And this, this is the library was built here. And one more picture to show you. This is Haywood Street. This is kind of across the street, almost across the street from where we are. Here's Perlman's Furniture Company. It's a very, very old and well-known establishment in Asheville. Let's see, what's here? I think this might be the Castagna building, right, Patty? It is. It is the Castagna building. Anyway, so that's just to let you know where we are. This is just a little taste of what you will find in the exhibit panels and in the book. So again, I want to encourage you to look at those, and let me just see if there's anything else that I left out. I don't think I did. Before I bring up our panel, one of whom is was part of the Perlman family and worked in his own family store. So I guess we need to have the lights up. The library is going to magically bring up a table for the panelists to sit at, and I will introduce them. And after we talk a little bit, then you all can ask some questions. Well, while this is being set up, I would like to just say one more thing, which is that Sharon and I did a project initially called The Man Who Lived on Main Street, which is all about Saul Schulman, who had a store for 70 years himself in Sylvan, North Carolina, close to where Western Carolina University is. There, it's being held up back there, it's being waved around. Sharon and I have donated an entire box of these books to the Friends of the North Carolina Room. They are selling them, and this is to support them. They get to keep all the money. It's a great little book. It's literally the stories that people told us about Saul Schulman and our rabbi at the time having to say. He was very glad that this was done, and it's the reason that he could actually be here. One point I want to make, because someone said this to me when I was tromping around town this 2 weekends ago, getting these put up, because the stores had changed since the last time we had them up, so we needed to get new people. And someone turned me away because they weren't going to support. They did not want to support any one particular group. And I said, well, what do you mean? This is history. I don't know what you're talking about. Well, this is Jewish. And I just want to let you know that it is a phenomenon, a socioeconomic phenomenon. This Blake didn't buy it. And that religion was pretty much never talked about. It was not, people weren't talking to their customers about religion. People were just very happy to be in the South, being able to have a way, a livelihood to support their family. It had nothing to do with whether or not you were a religious person. So just so you know, that was one little thing I left out of here. Just for people who don't really understand the idea of the Jewish store, it is a socioeconomic phenomenon, and it really no longer exists. And maybe we'll talk about that. I think we will with our panelists who are coming up here now. So I think I'm going to scoot the table up a little bit because you guys don't have very much room. So let's bring Skip Perlman up here. Skip. Sit. We also have Ellen Carr. Ellen Carr's family started Tops for Shoes. David Schulman is the son of Saul Schulman, who we did our project about. David also had his own stores. He was not really, didn't work for his father as an adult, and some of those stores were in Asheville. And Dennis Winter, who is here, Dennis Winter's father started Winter's Department Store, which is kind of right next to, I don't know, it's where there's an art store right now, next to Issa's on the corner of Battery Park and Haywood. And Dennis can tell you his own story, but he did not primarily work in the store as an adult. He was a lawyer and a judge, which is fine with me. So I will sort of sit on the end here, moderate this, and I think we can go down the line and get my little questions going. I have a new phone and a new computer. I've suddenly jumped from 5 years ago to now. So great, so we've got good time to talk about this. All right, I'm gonna ask a question and I assume all of you all will answer it in order. I'll have to pass down this microphone. First, let's talk sort of as quickly, as succinctly as you can about how and or why did your ancestors come to Asheville, when, and I've already told everyone what your family store was, but maybe if you know when they opened it. So.
Thank you, Jan. The first ancestor that came to...
Just hold it close. Just
Okay.
hold it close and speak.
How's that?
Yeah.
The first ancestor who came to Asheville, his name was Solomon Michaelov. I refer to him as Uncle S.H. And Solomon came to Asheville through Knoxville, Tennessee. He had immigrated from Lithuania over to Knoxville because he had an acquaintance there from that same town in Lithuania, and that's where he ended up. And after a year or so in Knoxville, he wanted to open his own business, and he didn't want to open one in Knoxville in competition with his friend. And we believe that that was somewhere in 1888, 1889. And the reason he came to Asheville is that there were some other people who had come to Asheville, preceded him, and he knew them and he decided to come to Asheville. And those two people, one was Harry Bloomberg's father, Louis Bloomberg, and the other was Sid Shockett's mother, Sid being Jan's father, Sid Shockett's mother's father, his name was Aaron Bloomberg. So that's what brought him to Asheville. And subsequently, he went into business and opened a business called the IXL store, which specialized in very, very nice crystal and china. And that was he was the first of 7 brothers and sisters who eventually came to Asheville.
Great, thanks. Thank you. Ellen?
My father was in the wholesale men's clothing business in New York City. He had a partner who was not a very good man, and the business went under. And my father had been selling down in this area of the country, wholesale. My mother wanted to get out of New York to get away from my father's family. And my father sold a fellow named Izzy Goldstein.
Awesome.
who's also on Hook Izzy had Goldstein Salvage on Lexington Avenue. And Izzy said to my dad, "You really need to come down here because the farmers come into town twice a year in their overalls and their pockets are full of money." And so my dad opened a store called the Bargain Center where downtown Books and News is on Lexington Avenue. It was a general store, the shoe department. The store was opened in 1953. The shoe department was the most successful department in the store, so he kept that store going and then opened a shoe store up the block where we are now, where the men's store is now. That happened in 1960, and the store grew from there.
I just want to add one thing about the farmers that you all heard about. I don't remember when the West North Carolina Farmers Market opened, but before that, for most of our lives, the farmers market was literally at the end of Lexington. Just there's a paved lot right before 240. So that was the farmers market, where literally farmers brought their wagons, hitched 2 horses, or probably horses, into town, were their trucks, and those were the farmers that Izzy Goldstein was telling Ellen's father about.
My father came from a large family of 8 children, and so there was a big age discrepancy. His older sisters moved south, really not sure, in the 1920s, I think, peddling. They were married, and I guess their husbands peddled in Charleston and Orangeburg, South Carolina. So as the brothers and sisters got older, in my father's case, he was 18 years old, and he was working for his brother. There were Shulman stores in Marion, High Point, Bessemer City, Canton, Cherryville. My grandfather eventually moved down also, and he was raising the 2 younger children, the younger boys, which was my father, Saul, and his brother, Jack. Jack ended up in Hendersonville, Brevard, and Dad ended up in Silva. Not sure exactly the facts of the matter, other than Dad said that his father had built a store in Silva. It was during the Depression. Dad came to Silva in 1932, and the store remained empty for about a year, and nobody had rented it. And so Dad said at 18, he talked his father into saying, "Well, let me give it a shot." So he opened a store there, and he stayed in that same location in that same store for over 70 years. One of the funny stories that I think is probably in Jan's book, Dad said the first week he came to Silva, of course, at that time there were a lot of boarding houses, and so anyway, the first weekend he came to open the store, and it was a Saturday night, and that's when, of course, people came to town on Saturdays. And anyway, during the middle of the night, he heard gunshots, and so Dad said he sort of peeked through the windows, and sort of wondered what he'd gotten into coming into this little town. And then, so he closed the blinds up and worried all night, and went down for breakfast at the boarding house the next day, and said, who was shooting out there? What's going on? And they said, oh, that's just, there's 2 doctors in town. They're brothers, Big Doc Nichols and Little Doc Nichols. And every Saturday night, or many Saturday nights, Big Doc Nichols gets on his horse naked and rides through town shooting his gun. So that was Dad's start in Silva.
Trying to figure out how to make this brief. My paternal grandparents came to Savannah from Belarus somewhere between 1904 and 1907. My grandfather owned a succession of small stores of different types, all of which he failed at. And when my dad got out of high school, He went to work for a cousin in Hazelhurst, Georgia. In 1932, when Dad was 22, my Uncle Joe owned a store in Silva. And he had Dad come up from Hazelhurst to run the store while he went away on a honeymoon. Of course, that was the depth of the Depression. And a lawyer in Canton got wind of that. He was the receiver of a little store called The Hole in the Wall. And I know exactly where it was, and it was very tiny. And was looking for somebody to run it while it was in the receivership. And so after Uncle Joe came back to Sylvie, got Dad to come over to Canton, and Dad ran the store and then borrowed a couple of $1,000s from relatives and bought the store from the receivership. And that's how he got to Canton. He met my mother in 1940, who had moved to Asheville via Brevard from Brooklyn. And they fell in love, and he married her. And Mother, I was born in 42, Mother made him, had a distrust of the Haywood County schools. So she made him promise to move to Asheville when I got to school age. And in 1946, he opened the little store that Jan talked about on the corner of Battery Park and Haywood Street, and within a year had rented a store that was much larger. By that time, he owns the stores in Canton, Brevard, and Waynesville. He sold the Brevard and Waynesville stores to get enough money to open the store here, and opened the store on Haywood Street. So that's how we got to Asheville.
Quick follow-up, so that was Winter's Department Store, which was not a little store. It was almost as big as our famous Bon Marché, which is where Earthfield is now. And everyone knows that Harry Winter was never in his office. He was always out talking to the customers, and he was just, everyone loved Harry Winter. One comment on what David's story about the doctor, yes, that is in our book. There are many funny stories like that. I thought you were going to tell the story about how the first day or the first week your dad opened, 10 men came in. He saw 10 men, like Chamber of Commerce type men came, and he assumed they were coming to welcome him. And they said to him, "You're never going to make it." And he thought he was taken back. He was 19 years old, and he was kind of insulted, and he just said, "I'm going to show him." And he did. He stayed there for 70 years. So, learn about Saul Schulman and support the North Carolina Ring by getting the little Saul Schulman book in the back. Okay, now we're not going to actually segue from Michael Love's store to Perlman's Furniture. We're just going to, I think this next question might do that. But the question I want to ask you is, did the women of your family work in the store? I know that my mother always did, but in some families they didn't. And then did you work in the store? And if you did, what age did you begin working in the store? Were there extended family members? Like, what was the family situation in your store?
Jan, just before I begin to launch into that explanation, Dennis's father's department store, Winters, was south of Perlman's Furniture, 3 or 4 blocks down, just about where you see the second car on the right-hand side.
Just
right
about there.
It
There's
was
both for you right now.
It was quite a nice store. I remember going in there many, many times with my mother. The first part of the question, did the women work in the business, is most definitely. My grandmother's maiden name was Hattie Michelove, and she married a gentleman whose name was Barney Perlman, and they got married in 1901. Barney came up this way, and there's various tales how he came here. One that he had caught the train to go over to somewhere in Tennessee and marry a woman that was looking for a husband, and She came from a relatively prosperous family, which meant he had a little hole-in-the-wall store about the size of from here to there. Anyway, he got off the train to buy a cigar, and my grandmother was working in the cigar store. So he never made it to Tennessee. He stayed. And Hattie Michaelove's father, Isaac, and Hattie's mother, Sarah Malky Michaelove, ran a little wholesale grocery store on Biltmore Avenue, which was Michaelove Grocery Company. And subsequently, Pop Perlman and Mom Perlman had an assortment of little small grocery stores in various neighborhoods around Asheville. And after that, they opened the Railroad Salvage Company, which was located where the present Bank of Asheville is, which is now a vacant building next to the S&W, to the right-hand facing side of the S&W. And they sold bulk groceries and railroad salvage. My grandfather, Barney, had become friendly with the local freight agent for the Southern Railroad, and therefore they had sold anything from toothbrushes to dresses to hats to anything that they could possibly sell. And subsequently from there, they started selling furniture, which is a whole nother story how they got into furniture business. And it was always called Perlman's Railroad Salvage Company, and eventually it transitioned to Perlman's Furniture, which was located here.
My mother worked in our business for many, many years. She was the personnel person, and my father did all the bookwork and the buying. He said that it was in the buy where you made the money, not in the sell. And so she did that. I remember trying on a lot of shoes. I don't think I really worked. But I brought my husband back to town, who has worked a lot in the business, and I have too, in the last 35 years.
My mom, Lillian, did work with Dad in the store every day. She was the register person. She ran the register. And my late brother worked in the store. I worked in the store. My favorite memory of working in the store was I guess I always wanted my own thing, you know? And so I talked my father into letting me manage the tie-tack department. Tie-tack department was about, I don't know, 10. I guess I was about 10. And believe it or not, I mean, I know throughout, the memories aren't always accurate. But there was one Saturday, this guy came in, and I sold that guy 5 tie-tacks. I don't even know if anybody knows what a tie-tack is anymore. Sort of velvet ties. Why anybody would buy 5, I don't know. But my father said as I walked back to the register, I had the biggest smile on my face that he's never seen.
My mother generally did not work in our store except during the Christmas season. She would go in for maybe between Thanksgiving and Christmas and work during that time most years that I can remember. She also helped my dad. Our store really wasn't a department store, it was a clothing store. That was it. All kinds of clothing, but it was a clothing store, and she, on many occasions, went to New York with Dad, who did all the dress buying and stuff and helped him do that. The one exception to the clothing was that during the Christmas season, up until I was about 14, Dad would move some stuff around and open a little toy department. And at age 12, I went in at Christmas time and sold toys. By the time I was 15, I was selling children's and men's shoes, worked every Friday night, Saturday, throughout the main part of the year. And in fact, trying to remember which year this was, I think when I was 16, I was a junior counselor in a camp not far from here, and the children and men man died, and Dad had nobody else who knew how to sell, who knew anything about shoes. He had to train somebody. So he called me back in from camp, and I ran that department that summer. He raised me. He always paid me. I started out at $0.25 an hour, and that summer he raised me to $1 an hour, which to me was big bucks at that time.
In order to be able to have some question time, I'm gonna have to cut this a little short, but these guys have about 5 more major questions to ask. And we'll just have to continue this at some other time. But I want to ask one more question, but I want to also make another sort of remark that I kind of remembered from hearing what everyone on the panel said. There was also this whole phenomenon of the Jewish store wasn't about religion, but what it was about was community. I mean, everybody knew, if you weren't related to somebody and you didn't see them at family dinners or holiday time, you did see them at temple or synagogue or the Jewish Community Center, which has been in Asheville for 75 years. This is the 75th anniversary year. Or you saw them in the restaurants at lunchtime, and all the restaurants were owned by Greeks, and they served American food because they didn't believe that people in the South would eat Greek food, which was probably true. And one story that I love, when I was a little child, our store was right across the street from where Tom's Grill, which was literally a little grill where salsas, the beginning of salsas was. And they had one of these sort of gerbil machines that held hot dogs. It was like a grill that held hot dogs. It was in the window. Those were the best hot dogs. But every year in the spring, they would have a box of Manischewitz matzah in the window, not to sell. I asked my dad when I was a little kid. It was right across the street from our store, and it was very noticeable when you just were coming and going to the store. And I also went to Tom's Grill a lot for lunch. But I asked my dad, why did Tom have matzah in the window? And, why does he have matzah in the window? He said, I don't know, I guess somebody brought it in. When what he meant was all the merchants right around there on Patton Avenue and the square, they ate lunch every day, and at Passover they weren't going to eat hamburgers and hot dogs probably, so they had matzahs. And so the Greeks and the Jews here in Asheville had a long history that went back. So in order not to ask 20 million more questions, try to make this short, but I know Dennis has a wonderful story that he told me that is in our oral history. But why, except for Ellen, you get to tell a success story, but why did your store close, and how did that come about, and maybe how you felt about it?
The furniture store closed in its last location, which was on Tunnel Road, in 1995. So it started in 1926 as a railroad salvage furniture store and went to 1995 out at Tunnel Road. We moved from here out to Tunnel Road in 1973. And the reason it closed is I was the only living relative that was interested in the furniture business. And I've worked there for almost 40 years, and I had no children who were vaguely interested in being in the retail furniture business. And an opportunity came to transfer the ownership of that business to another company, and I took it, and in 1995, I walked away.
How'd you feel about that?
I felt pretty good at the time.
It's still going. Our business is now in the third generation. My husband and I moved back from Atlanta when my father became ill. I was an only child. We were in television. We came up here, we thought for a year to help him out.
What year was it?
That was 1975.
What was your maiden name?
Resnikov.
Thank you.
And our son Alex, one of 3 children that we have, the only one interested in the business, came back to Asheville 10 years ago and is now in the store. Hallelujah.
Dad's store closed in 2003,
3.
thank you. And of course, he was in his 90s and not in good health. Really didn't have any business left, really. He just sort of came to work and everybody came to talk to him. But that's all he ever knew. And I told the reporter from the Dale Neal, the writer from the Asheville Citizen, he was talking about now in this generation, in any business, or any investment you make, there's always the term, what's the exit strategy? And I told him that in the generation before me, at least, the grave was the exit strategy. So Dad, one day in 2003, Dad called, and I picked up the phone and he said, "I'm done." And I said, "What?" And he said, "I'm done. I'm going home." Walking the door. And that was the end of the story. And then when I had my own stores throughout the area, and this store just wasn't a fit. So when he closed up, he gave his entire inventory to the hospital auxiliary, and they ran sort of a going out of business sale and kept the money for the hospital auxiliary.
In 1969, when my dad was 59, and he was still working 72-hour weeks, and as Jan said, and it was the truth, he was on his feet all the time. He had a fairly serious heart attack in the fall. And actually, I was practicing law here by then, and while he was recuperating, I ran the store on Friday nights and Saturdays while I was trying to practice law the rest of the time. None of the 3 of us, my younger sister, who was also a lawyer, and my brother, who was a computer scientist, had any desire to go into that business. Well, he came back and he operated the store. Meanwhile, Westgate had opened up and the shopping centers were starting, and he didn't have the capital. Even if we had been, it's just lucky none of us wanted to go into it, because he didn't have the capital to get off of Haywood Street. And he also started, though you would have had to know him pretty well to notice it, at age 59, started having slight dementia after the heart attack. So he ran the store until 72. We had sold the Canton, or he closed the Canton store in 68. I helped him do that too. And in 72, he sold the store to an outfit out of eastern Tennessee who degraded. It had always been an upper middle class kind of clothing. The people who bought it degraded it to cheap schlock, and they went out of business 2 years later.
You told me a story about how you wanted to take it over and your dad told you not to when you were in college.
Maybe my brother told me that.
Well, I think the library closes at 8, and I don't think they want us to stay here another hour, but we do have time for a few questions, and I think, what is the story with microphones? Is this the only microphone? Is someone going to run?
That's the only one.
Do I need to?
I can do it if you'd like.
Or ask the question and I will just, I'll repeat it if I can hear it. This lady who's first, okay?
Okay, I think it's important to know how philanthropic those early business people were in Asheville. All of the buildings at UNC Asheville campus that they have donated. Lipinski.
Well, actually, I want to have a word about that. There used to be, a long time ago, buildings were named after you if you worked hard for them, not because you gave them money to build the buildings. So, if I'm not mistaken, am I wrong in that? I believe that probably Lipinski might have given some money, but not all the money by any means. He spent many hours making sure that UNCA happened, and he was on the planning committees, and it was that type of giving for him and for Mr. Zager and for some of the other buildings there. I know that Harry Glenberg in the St. Joseph Hospital, there's a surgery wing named after the Glenbergs, and they probably did get money for that. And many institutions that we know had some of these families on the boards, the Art Museum, the Symphony, the library, I mean, just everything. Jewish merchants actually started the Downtown Merchants Association, which of course, everybody could belong to it, but a significant number of the businesses were owned by Jewish business owners. So they had a lot of input as to how the Christmas parade and just all kinds of little things that happened in town. No, there wasn't a Hanukkah parade, but there was a Christmas parade. And, I can't even think of all the different philanthropic organizations that, thank you for asking that question, because it is an important thing to raise. Yes?
Being new to Asheville and the South, I'm very curious about the relationship between the Jewish community and here, the Jewish businesses and the African American community, and like what, was there a difference in how the Jewish-owned businesses related to Jim Crow and the non-Jewish, and did you employ, I'm just interested in that whole subject.
Okay, so the question is about how African Americans and Jewish business owners related or didn't relate to each other, and I will just say there actually should probably be a book or two written about that here. But Dennis, do you want to? Dennis has a wonderful story about that.
I know more about that. This was, when I grew up here, this was the segregated South. And as though things may be not as hard as some of the places farther south than here, Jews here were scared to stick their neck out. Very far, at least. I remember when Dad opened the store, not the little store, but the larger store on Hayward Street next to Ivan's, that there was a black and white water fountain in there. He immediately, and now we're talking about in the 40s still, he immediately ended that. He immediately ended the colored bathrooms from just the bathrooms. But things did not happen very quickly here. And he, even though he grew up in the Deep South, he always had trouble dealing with segregation. He wasn't the type of person to jump out in the front of a parade. But he did do things, and I'm going to tell you a couple of them that he did, because I know when there were other people, I've heard stories about Harry Bloomberg, back in the 30s, hiring a black mechanic who came back home from Detroit, that other people tried to stop him from doing it, and he did it anyway. That's one story. My dad, at some point, there was a very active chapter of the National Association of Christians and Jews, and there was a Catholic chairman and a Protestant chairman and a Jewish chairman, and my dad was a Jewish chairman for several years. And one of the years that he was, and this was I was still in high school, so it was in the late 50s. They had an annual dinner for Brotherhood Week. Brotherhood Week was something that organization nationally had. And it was scheduled to be at the George Vanderbilt Hotel. Right next door. And they were going to bring in a black choir to sing as the entertainment. And the Vanderbilt Hotel wouldn't let them do that. So Dad insisted that they not cave into this, and they ended up moving the annual Brotherhood dinner to one of the black churches where they could do that. That's one story. The second story also happened about that time. Dad decided it was time that we had some black sales clerks on the floor. I remember this very distinctly. Again, he wasn't going to jump out in front of the train, so he went to the manager of Bon Marché then, to the manager of Ives and Belks, and convinced them to all put out a black person on the sales floor on the same day. And there may have been other stores. Those are the four I know of. And we had a person who ran our elevator. Her name was Irene, can't remember her last name. But he got her in the office and said, "Would you like to do this?" And she said yes. And he said, "Do you understand that people are going to be calling you nasty names, and a lot of people aren't going to like this?" And anyway, he put her out on the floor in our teenage girls department, and she ended up running that department. So they did do some things. It wasn't my dad. I happen to know because he was my father. There were other merchants who did other things, I'm sure, that I don't know all the stories of. But it was slow. I mean, they didn't want to put their families at risk, and that was true throughout the South.
Anybody else have a comment?
Just a short story. When my mother always kept kosher in the house, even when she first moved from New Jersey, and when she had to kosher her own meat in the basement and all this stuff. I mean, we would eat out, but it's one of those things. But anyway, we kept kosher at home. And when my mom died, we had a black lady that worked for my family since I guess I was in the 3rd grade, Mary. And as the story goes, my father came home just from the funeral and said, "Mary," said, "we've kept kosher all these years, and you've kept meat plates and milk plates and changed over for Passover, and you know all of that, and I really appreciate that. But now that Mrs. Schulman is gone, we're not going to keep kosher anymore. And Mary said, Mr. Schulman said, as long as I'm in this house, we're going to keep kosher.
Yes.
I just want to say, my father was Harry Bloomberg, and he had Harry's Cadillac Pontiac, and he also had a used car lot. He had the only black used car salesman, I think, in the South at the time, Sam Bird. And he was a wonderful salesman and very well respected. So, and that was a long time ago.
In the 60s. That was in the 1940s. Wow. Yes.
Wondering if you could, or someone on the panel could characterize Jewish-Gentile relations back in those days. I mean, one of the things we've liked so much about moving to Asheville is that there's lots of people with differences, but everybody seems to get along real well, and I'm wondering if that goes back in the past.
Well, I'm just going to address that because when Sharon and I interviewed 35 different people in between 2001 and 2005, and most of them were in their 80s and 90s. Most of them are not here anymore. We asked that question to, well, actually, some of them were younger. Babs, who just stood up and remarked that, was one of the people we interviewed. She and her sister, who's not here anymore. We asked that question to every single person, and everyone, basically, did you experience much anti-Semitism here? And basically, here was the stock answer that every single person said, and you all can have input too. No, we never had, nobody ever said anything about anything. There was kind of an undercurrent in the fact that we were not allowed to belong to the country clubs. But that was just accepted, and we had our own places where we went to, and never really had a problem. I think every person, me included, had one incident from one cranky person who would come up and say something. But does anybody else have anything to add to what I just said? Pretty much an open, I mean, I grew up with every kind of Christian religion, Greek American kids, Jewish kids, Lebanese kids, people from everywhere. It was very, pretty much open. Yes.
Hi, my name is Bruce Tufeld. I'm last time.
Wait, excuse me. I haven't seen Bruce Tufeld in like 40 years, and he's one of my cousins. So we just got here and I to give him a hug. Like his dad, who was the announcer, who did say, Danger Will Robinson did. That was his mom. He was the robot.
The robot lost his face.
So, okay, so you got right.
My mother was raised in Campbell, Florida. And her spelling was B-L-U-M-B-E-R-G. Her father was Max Harry Bloomberg. I'm just questioning how half the Bloombergs are B-L-O-M. Number one, and Ellen, is that your name? Ellen. You mentioned something about television. I'm in the television business and film business, and I grew up in that business. So I'm just curious, in the television business, what you guys did down here. I think we could something about television. Right?
They were on television in Atlanta, and they're lucky they're on television now. Well, this is really a family discussion, but it's a funny little anecdote. So the story was that Babs's grandfather, Harry's father, Louis Bloomberg, was having a sign painted one day for.
It was a cornerstone of a building.
Cornerstone.
The story, it was a cornerstone of a building which still exists out at Harry's Cadillac. And they misspelled the name, B-L-O-M, because we had relatives in Savannah with B-L-U-M. But they misspelled the name and they were So the story goes that we changed the name to B-L-O-M.
And that was during the Depression, that's why it was so tight, right? Yeah.
I have a question for Dennis. When you were doing your shoe fittings and the shoe training, why didn't you use that x-ray machine? Remember that upstairs?
My brother and I have
commented many times that we're surprised our feet haven't fallen.
Was that, what was her name up there worked in the,
Do what?
I'm trying to think of the lady's name that worked upstairs.
Pearl McCurry.
Pearl McCurry. That's it. Pearl, who was the guy? Jim West?
No, this was before Jim.
Before him.
He took it over later on.
Was that for sizing?
No, yeah, some of you all undoubtedly had this wherever you came from, but before anybody knew about the dangers of x-rays, stick your foot in to make sure that the shoe fit right. We always just, my brother and I just always sort of played with it.
That's about what
So far, we're still there.
Okay, and this is the last question, if anyone has a question. Yes, Beth.
Actually, I just have a quick anecdote that speaks to the relationship between the Gentile community and the Jews. Most of these people up here are going to know Tony Hoffman. Tony Hoffman was the only Jewish kid in my Girl Scout camp. It rained like crazy. She was one of the smallest kids too. She got us in the dining hall, taught us all how to do the hora. What? Somebody owes that woman money to this day. We danced our little hearts out.
Well, don't leave yet. I want to thank you. I want to also tell, yeah, if you want to stay and ask questions longer up here, that's fine with me. These people might need to leave. But remember that the Saul Schulman book in the back is supporting the North Carolina Room 100%. There's a sign-up sheet for the history of the Jews of Asheville. There's the exhibit book for sale. And if you want to know where the panels are, here are two websites. Write this down. InsiderCarolina.com/family-store-exhibit. InsiderCarolina.com/family-store-exhibit or Facebook.com/thefamily